I feel that for 53 conversations, we've been trying to champion the idea of voice. We've been trying to champion people's right to be heard. We've been trying to make people think in creative ways about all that they do. And we've also been trying to tackle issues around inequality, disadvantage, and trying to bring all of these themes together. And today, for me, just really encapsulates that. I'm absolutely delighted at the people we've got with us tonight, particularly Fiona Duncan, who led the independent care review and is now working on the delivery of that review through the Promise. Fiona, just for me, she's genuine, she's direct, she's passionate, she's absolutely dynamic, and she also knows how to work within the system. And because of all of these qualities, but particularly because of a genuine openness and I think a real imaginative quality that she has, I think she's helped to shape the review as something that should really make a difference, and we'll come back to that. But with that introduction, I'd just like to pass over to Fiona, just to say a bit about what she thinks the links are between this conversation and the care review.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I can see you're all little round circles at the bottom of my screen, but I managed to see the guest list just before the event. So I know some of you, and I'm glad to see you here. And I know some of you were involved in the care review, and actually you could probably give parts of the presentation I'm about to give. So if you get a bit bored during what I'm saying, go off and get yourself another mince pie. I am really chuffed to be part of these creative conversations. As many of you know, the care review exists because of creative conversations. Through the work of Who Cares Scotland, the First Minister had been meeting children and young people who had been in care, who had told her their story. They had been supported to tell her their story about life growing up in care, about being removed from their families. Some of those stories were filled with hope and filled with love, but many more of them were filled with struggles, filled with mental health, filled with homelessness as an adult, their engagement with the justice system, about not having the support networks or good relationships in place and not feeling as if they didn't achieve their potential. They talked about the care system's role in all of this, and how it hadn't given them a sense of family, a sense of belonging, a sense of love. It hadn't supported them to be the people that they'd wanted to be. So the First Minister promised in October 2016 that there'd be an independent root and branch review of the care system, and it would look at legislation, practice, culture and ethos. She also promised at that point that it would be driven by people who had experience of care. So when I was appointed in February 2017, that sort of gave me a bit of a template to make sure that the review didn't look like other reviews, and I capitalised on that. And throughout the care review, we ensured that the care community was at the heart of every decision and every conversation. So all of the governance of the care review was at least 50% weighted, at least 50% towards care experience. But one of the real reasons that I'm excited about being here tonight is the link between the creative conversations and the care review. So over the course of 3 years, the care review heard over 5,500 stories. Over half of these were from infants, children, young people and adults who knew the care system, and also families. And the care review very deliberately and very sensitively used lots of creative approaches to support storytelling. So I learned lots of new skills about how to engage with, in particular, really little children who maybe didn't have their voice, or children with disabilities who didn't have a voice and didn't communicate in the way that I was used to communicating. And so we used creative storytelling a lot to create safe environments for children, young people and families to tell their story. And the thing that struck me throughout the 3 years of the care review was the number of children and young people who were willing to talk about the most intimate and traumatic things that had happened in their life, and often doing so in the knowledge that nothing would change in terms of their past, but what they were doing was selflessly and generously telling their story in the hope that something would change in the future for another child or another family who would be coming along after them. So the stories were told with an immense generosity and selflessness, but they were also told with a very specific purpose. And for some, it took 3 years before they told the care review what it was that they wanted the care review to know. So we spent a really significant amount of time building bonds of trust. As David reminded me earlier, care reviews have come and gone. There have been many care reviews in the past, and this one had to be different, but also this one had to convince the care community that it would be different and that there was a value in them sharing their story and telling their story. If Laura was here, Laura Beveridge, who was hoping to be here tonight, if she was here right now, she would be telling me to talk about hope and love, and how the care review, one of the major things that the care review had to do was make sure that the care community could hope that life would be different as a result of this review this time. So from the outset, I made a commitment to go to where children and young people and their families were, to meet them in a space where they felt safe, to go as often as was necessary to build trust, to have conversations with them at their pace. So it wasn't about me going and interrogating folk, to gently prompt and steer the conversation so that I could understand what had to change, but not to direct the conversation in a way that it limited it or it risked not hearing about the things that mattered to the care community. And my job was to listen. And in doing this and in taking this approach, the care review identified gaps in what it is Scotland knew then about this thing that we call a care system. And in particular for Kelly and Kath, who are here, who work with me in my Cora life, I think that they would be really disappointed if I didn't remind folk that there are 44 pieces of legislation, 19 pieces of secondary legislation, and 3 international conventions governing this thing that we call a system, which is not a system. You can't have a system with that number of moving parts. So we needed to listen to what mattered to people, and we identified that there's massive gaps in what we know. So we didn't know very much about intergenerational patterns of care. We didn't know very much about the conflation of poverty and neglect. And it was through storytelling that we understood what it was that Scotland had to better understand and where we needed to do more research. And in doing so, we aimed to build solutions. What the care community told us was that they didn't want to be admired as if they were a problem. And again, that's typically what reviews do. They identify what's wrong. What the care community wanted was a set of solutions around what worked for them. I think this still happens now. I have to be very careful what I say because I'm conscious this has been recorded. But typically reviews are delivered by people who are custodians of the system, and they listen to other people in the system and they devise solutions for the system rather than solutions for the people that the system exists to serve. So the care review was very deliberate in listening to what mattered to children and families and building solutions about what mattered to children and families. And we were very conscious throughout these conversations how upsetting it can be for somebody to tell their story and retell their story. So the care review looked after every single person who wanted to be part of it, and everybody was offered free and confidential counselling if they wanted it, to make sure that they were kept safe. We also told people that we respected absolutely their right to anonymity, and that if they told us their story, we would never retell it for our purpose. And to do this, the brilliant folk at the care review team did an incredible piece of work with those 5,500 stories and reviewed them all to look for stories that could be retold that were all children and none. So these are fabricated stories. They're composite stories that reflect all of the stories that we were told. They're available on YouTube. And when I'm not speaking, I'll do a Google search and find them and put the link in the chat. If you've not watched them, I would urge you to watch them. All these stories were written by the care reviews team to reflect the stories we'd heard, to be all children and no children. And when we'd written them, we went back out to children and young people who told us their story and asked them to check them. And they did. I love it when children and young people check my homework. It really reminds me how I need to do better. So children and young people told us that the stories weren't quite good enough. So there's a story about James. And in the story about James, James says his mum's unwell. In the first version of James's story, it said James's mum either is struggling with her addiction or James's mum is struggling with her mental health. Kids were going, we don't say that. That might have been how we'd said our story or how our story had been, but that's not what we say. What we say is our mum's not well. So in James's story, it now says James's mum isn't well. We also took the animation back out to children and young people and said, what do you think of the animations? And in one of the animations, the child's parents in jail. So they said, where are the bars on the window? You would put bars on a window if somebody was in jail, so we had to go back and put bars on the window. We were really sensitive about the stories. So there's a wee girl who's 10 years old. We went to the National Records of Scotland from 10 years ago and looked at the most popular girls' names in and around that time, and found that Olivia was a name which was often used at that time, it was an often really popular name. So the 10-year-old girl is called Olivia. So these children are all children and no children. And at the end, once we'd concluded the composite stories and the children were happy with them, they told us how they recognised themselves, they recognised their friends, they didn't feel lonely through telling their story, they didn't feel as if it was only them, and that the stories gave them the feels. And I think that's the best report card I have ever had. So these creative conversations were incredibly important to the care review. It was incredibly important to us that we were having meaningful conversations with children and young people, and that we were keeping them safe and respecting their right to anonymity, and that they were purposeful. I think that my job has been to honour the care community, and I hope that they think that that's been done. My job now is to make sure that Scotland keeps the promise that was made to children and young people and actually delivers on the care review. And another day, at another time, it might be interesting to have a conversation about how the reports ended up being called The Promise and the Pinky Promise. And I was mentioning to David earlier that we're setting up a Promise Design School for the care community to learn service design. And I'm really hopeful that we can have a Pinky Promise Design School where children and young people can take their copy of the Pinky Promise and come up with all the things that they want to happen. And I'm looking for one really bold local authority to say that they'll deliver on all of that. And then a group of children who maybe with extra Hannibal, we can all come up with some amazing ideas and have some more creative conversations about how Scotland can keep the promise to its care community. So I'm at Fiona The Promise on my Twitter handle. I was advised to tell you that in case we're tweeting about tonight, and I'm here for the rest of the evening and happy to take any conversations about creative conversations. Thank you.
I mean, that's just absolutely brilliant. I don't think we could have asked for a contribution that made the links better than that one did. And the chat line's open. Please, please, people, come back with any questions that'll help to inform the conversation that we have with Fiona in a little while. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at, I think, two things that are hugely important. One is the whole idea of voice. And Fiona has absolutely exemplified the way in which the review opened up to the voices of the care community. And I'm not in any doubt that Who Cares and the voices that Who Cares channeled were significant in moving forward the situation for care experienced young people in Scotland. But if you're going to have a voice, you need to have the confidence to use it. And you need to have the articulacy and the willingness. And it was fascinating, Fiona, to hear you talk about learning to listen and learning to engage with stories. That was really powerful. And we've got some really superb examples of current practice that we can build on as we move forward in trying to bring the strength of the care community and others experienced and disadvantaged together to make sure that we translate that into change. And one of the examples of that is the work that's been done by colleagues Sean Young and Laura Finlay through Edinburgh Screen. And what I'm now going to do is pass over to the two of them, completely unrehearsed. We were picking up some of the briefing and preparation in this around about 10 to 4 this afternoon. So good luck, Sean and Laura. And they're going to lead us into an example of the kind of work that they've done with care experienced young people. So Sean, Laura, over to you.
Thank you, David. So I'll kick us off. As David says, Sean's going to show an extract from a great film that was made as part of some of the work that he's done with ScreenEd. I think just to give a bit of context, my introduction will just provide a little bit of information about the kind of work that we do for those that maybe haven't heard of us before. As David says, my name's Laura Finlay. I work for Screen Education Edinburgh. We're a film education charity based in North Edinburgh and have been active for over 4 decades. So some of you might remember us as Pilton Video. That might ring a bell for some people. And we develop skills across all ages in different projects. We work with partner orgs as well, but not always. And we work in and out of schools delivering in different communities across Edinburgh. I absolutely loved Fiona's, commenting on the fact that the language and the imagery down to the very specifics, that the young people wanted to change certain things, the bars on the windows or saying that my mum is ill. It's very much about empowering people to tell their stories and being able to tell them in a way that utilises language that speaks to them and imagery that speaks to them. And I think that's something that we have very much in common at ScreenEd, empowering young people to tell films, not just kind of learning those skills to tell them through filmmaking, but also kind of empowering them to visually portray those stories, to use images that mean something to them. So I'm really excited to be part of this conversation, and some of what that work looks like in terms for ScreenEd is running kind of filmmaking courses which are free for young people. We develop young people from all different areas across Edinburgh, but we do have a kind of expertise in working and developing those from areas of deprivation or low income backgrounds, those that are care experienced, and lots of different kind of barriers to with different barriers to learning as well, towards studying film and also hopefully industry entry too. So some of that work that Sean's going to talk about, I'll pass over to him in just a second, has been working with care experienced young people. And my role specifically at ScreenEd is as a project manager. Some of the projects that I work on, for example, are in schools, and we do kind of target those that have barriers to participating in learning and undergoing creative endeavours, and try to aid them in expressing themselves, having the potential to open doors for them in terms of further education and vocational avenues as well. So for me, I think it's important to mention that creativity definitely has a central role in giving young people that voice, and I think we've already heard some of that great work by Fiona Duncan in The Promise as well. But there's still barriers to those accessing creative outlets. So in terms of kind of offering those creative outlets, I do believe they need to be shaped and delivered in such a way as to enable those with the most need or experience in certain barriers to be able to participate and benefit from that as well. So, to add to that in that wider picture, there's definitely value in creativity in and of itself. I think the work that we do is certainly appreciative of that. But in addition to that, being able to also offer other benefits, such as steps towards further education, learning a new skill, all that kind of stuff that really opens doors for young people. And not just young people as well, but those that work closely with them. So Fiona had also mentioned some of that too, teachers, youth workers, support workers and so on. How can we support them to work with young people and help them on their creative journey? So that's something that we're kind of thinking about and doing some of that work at the moment and kind of into 2021 as well. But I do want to kind of pass to Sean now to show a film. Sean, do you want to say a little bit about that, about The Lost Child, which is a film that was made, I think, part of the Cashback for Creativity programme, is that right?
That's right, Laura. Yeah, thanks. So before we watch the film, I want to talk specifically about the work we did with the care experienced young people and the sort of journeys that the young people went through on the project. So in 2018 and 2019, we did 8-week film filmmaking projects, both in partnership with Falkirk Champions and the Hippodrome Festival of Silent Cinema, through Cashback for Creativity funding. And the sort of job there was to work with care experienced young people to make a short film that would be screened at the Silent Film Festival. So, as daunting as that seems, making a film, showing it to hundreds of people, taking part in a live Q&A in front of those hundreds of people, that is very daunting, especially for those that maybe don't feel that comfortable in opening up. So the first step in our approach, when we're working with young people on projects is building a kind of good rapport and relationship with the learners, and trying to bring out the confidence and make them feel comfortable in speaking up first and foremost. I know when I go into these projects, when I deliver, I expect to be learning and understanding myself. I want to learn and understand the needs of the young people, their backgrounds, and figure out the best approach to bring out the creativity, the voice, and the confidence of each learner. That has to come first before we start getting them to share their ideas and share their experiences. As David said, what's the point having a voice if you don't have the confidence to use it? So that's first and foremost about getting them confident in doing that. So with this project in particular, with the care experienced young people, we started off, relaxed conversations, icebreaker games, fun exercises with the equipment, all the film equipment, that kind of stuff. And just making sure that it wasn't very overwhelming for the young people, and it didn't feel withdrawn at that stage. So it was purely fun technical exercises, but still having that creativity and that decision making when it came to coming out through deciding the choice of shot angles and mic placements and stuff like that. So the exercises were to nudge them and collaborating with one another and working as a team. The second year in particular, working with the care experienced young people, that it was the same process as the previous year, but it was working with a younger group, and there was two girls from the previous year who actually wanted to come back and work on this project again. And it wasn't a progression course in skill level, it was the exact same course, but they really wanted to come back and do it again, which was nice. And what was good about that is they could act as mentors to the young people, the other younger people doing this project for the first time. And after we had a couple of weeks of bonding and building the group, getting to grips with the film equipment, we started to discuss the ideas for the final film, and that's when we got to the story development stage, which is where we really want them to start sharing their experiences and start to have that voice. And where we were at is in the first year, we felt, and the young people felt as well, that the theme of care was avoided for various reasons. It was just too kind of true to home. They didn't feel comfortable making a film about that. But the first film was actually about being gay and opening up as gay, and that was based on real life experiences of some of the learners. And in the second year, one of the girls who was on the previous year, she eventually wanted to open up and talk about her experience in care and her tricky relationship with her mother, which was still very raw, and something she felt she maybe didn't have the confidence to do in the previous year, but now she did. And that was great. It was nice to see, and she felt she could express herself creatively, whilst touching on that real life experience and being completely in control of that situation, being in control of how the story was to develop and the outcome of that story too. And when she shared that to the group, the younger ones also, they started to open up in their experience as well around care, and they started to feed into the creative process and develop that idea and that theme of care as a group. And that was just great to see. Once that idea was developed and structured into a narrative piece, the passion started to grow in the young people, and everything started to progress very organically, with the young people leading the way from a creative point of view. And that continued with the storyboarding, planning visually how they were going to shoot the film, communicating with one another, shooting the film in rotating roles, and really kind of that sense of collaboration as a team. And again, continued through to the editing stage, deciding on the music, which was important for a silent film. And then they ended up producing what was called The Lost Child, which is an 8-minute film based on the experiences of one person in particular, and fed in with the rest of the group. So we're going to try and play that now. I believe, Lorna, you're going to try and stream it for us. It might be worth popping the link to the film in the chat as well, so people can watch it on their own streaming platform. And we're going to watch it from 2 minutes in. It is 8 minutes, so we'll watch it from 2 minutes in. Okay, you should still get a gist of the story.
Kate, I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Hello, yes, I'd love to just come in. I wanted to ask Sean and Laura, have they been involved in using rap with care experienced young people? I know a care leaver in Edinburgh who's would be quite amazing. She did something with a youngster in Fife just recently. It was exceptional.
I don't know if Fiona would like to even react to some of what she's heard. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot there, Fiona.
I'm happy to, yes. So the question about rap, the care review did use rap, and there's a couple of young care experienced rappers. One of them's released an album. I'm going to try and find a link to that and send it to you guys. And we found in particular that there's a sort of a certain age group and that really enjoys rap and that finds rap a good way to express themselves, and it sometimes feels like a sort of extension of poetry. So there's a group of young folk who maybe feel that poetry is not quite cool enough for them. I might be putting words in their mouth, whereas rap is. So yes, I'm going to try and find the link to young people and some of the rap projects that have been done. I think there's some specialists in this area as well who are really good at supporting young people to rap. So if anybody wants details of those, I'm sure I can find them and send them on. I'm not sure if you want to keep trying with the video or whether we want to move into questions, or David, what do you think?
What we'll do is we'll move into conversation, Fiona, and when we can get a link in to the film, we can go back to it. I think what we've got clearly is we've got an incredible momentum starting to build up around this concept that we're only going to get change if we make change with people. And I think that's what the conversations with Sean and Laura have essentially been about, that they've changed the perceptions of young people, changed the contributions of young people, moved things forward by doing it with them. And I think that's what you've really picked up on with the Independent Care Review, that if we're not doing things with people, then we're not going to get the depth and reality of change that we're looking for. Is that a view that you would strongly share, Fiona?
So the care review produced a series of reports, and the report that contained the majority of calls to action, over 80 calls to action, is called The Promise, which is why the organisation that's now been set up to deliver the care review is called The Promise. And The Promise very deliberately doesn't include numbered recommendations, because David, if I recommend a restaurant to you, you might go, I don't know if that woman's got very good taste in food. Certainly I saw a picture that you tweeted a moment ago, so if I recommended a hairdresser, I think I'm pretty clear that you wouldn't take up that recommendation. So we didn't recommend things because recommendations are take it or leave it, but we also didn't number them because if we had numbered them 1 to whatever, 20, say, people might go, well, 1 to 5 are going to be the most important, and 15 or 16 to 20 are going to be least important. The care review was really clear that all of these things are important, and what we didn't want was people to cherry pick parts of the conclusions that we'd come to, because children's lives don't live in siloed components. But your question, to answer your question, the whole of the Promise is built on 5 foundations, and the first foundation is voice. Basically, if you do not listen to and engage children, young people and their families in the decisions that are being taken about them, then you are not going to be meeting their needs. So the whole principle of the future of how we support families and children in their families, and children who for whatever reason can't live with their families, and the workforce and the sort of operating structure around that, is based on listening. So one of the big challenges that Scotland has, which is really relevant to tonight, is how to make sure that it becomes business as usual to involve people in decisions that are about them. So there has to be more creative and enabling ways that take into account all of the things around power, to properly listen to people and properly involve them in decisions that are going to change their lives. So yeah, how Scotland's going to become more participative is going to be a big challenge for the implementation of the promise.
I think we're going to come back, I think, to all of that, but I think we've now got the opportunity to see the film. And I think that's brilliant in terms of demonstrating the power of film and the way that we can get at the complexities around relationships and some of the challenges and the ongoing challenges that face young people in the same situation as those in the film. I think that's been really rich. We talked a lot, and I was so grateful when Fiona quoted Laura Beveridge and Laura's desire for us to talk about hope, because we do have so much to build on. And that's not just at the level of Edinburgh Screen, it's at the level of individual schools. We've got a couple of statements from young people in one of the Edinburgh secondary schools. And I'm going to ask now for Siobhan Wyman to read out these two statements from young people, because I think they give us a different example of the way that we can empower and enrich the lives of young people through the work that we're already doing. Siobhan.
Hello. Okay, I'll begin with the first one. When I was really young, I began to live with my nana because my mum and dad weren't fit to look after me. I had struggles with anxiety and panic attacks by the age of 6. I also started getting bullied at a very young age, which made my mental state. Before I knew it, I had no friends and felt alone and stranded. I started watching much more TV and films and quickly realised that on screen or on a stage is where I wanted to be. I had dreams of accepting awards and starring in my very own films. And by the time I started high school, these dreams were the only thing I knew, and I wasn't going to change my mind. Whenever I was in a play, I made sure my nana would come and see me, and she would always be my biggest supporter. My nana passed away when I was 15, and if I didn't have drama to keep me steady, I don't think I would be here today. I met some of the best people ever doing what I love and had some of the most fun I ever could have. Between meeting new social workers and losing family members, the only thing that ever felt like home was the stage, and it's the only thing I've ever been good at. That's from one young person. This is the other one. Before my first birthday, I left my real mum and lived with my great-gran. She passed away a few months later, and I was put into kinship care with my aunt, uncle, and their 2 children. Growing up wasn't the easiest time. I remember standing in my primary 1 line, looking at all the other children's happy families and feeling very insecure. I didn't get to have a stereotypical family. My biological brother passed away when we were both very young. My sister went to foster care, and I've never met my younger siblings. Personally, I think having attachments ripped away from me left a large hole in my heart that can never be filled. I don't think it's right I had to suffer finding out I had younger siblings through Facebook. And it hurts to think that the fact I didn't get the option to be a big sister to them. At 11 years old, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression that into my older years got progressively worse. I went through some very difficult situations on my own and didn't really have a safe space to turn to. I was reassigned a social worker in 3rd year after ongoing domestic issues. The last time I heard from a social worker was via text nearly 2 years ago, saying she'd be in on Friday, and she never ended up coming. I'll never forget how upset I was sitting in my school's reception for hours waiting for her. I had drama at the end of the day, and as soon as I walked into the room, I felt somewhat okay again. We started acting. I started to feel alive. The thrill of the stage lights and the feeling of accomplishment after a show is something that takes me away from all the pain in a heartbeat. It's an honour to be able to experience the stress of line learning, blocking and knowing cues. I would be lost without drama. It has become my safe space. It has given me a level of confidence I wouldn't have had in my day-to-day life. I think everyone should have the opportunity to be part of a drama or youth theatre. It's an amazing community to be part of, full of nurturing, kind people. I finally found my safe space in this place. If all care-experienced young people were exposed to such nurture from both drama and youth theatre, I believe they would have the chance to express what they're feeling in a safe environment in a comfortable way. It's an opportunity to explore the issues they may be experiencing in their own life, which could potentially give them some normality in who they are and what they struggle with. I wouldn't be where I am today without drama. It has been one of the only things I've had to hold on to over the past years of my struggles. That's their words.
Thanks, Siobhan. And that, I think was just so powerful, both the content and the way that you delivered that. So very, very grateful indeed for that. There's an awful lot of key messages coming through about the opportunity that people need to step outside themselves, to not always have to be themselves, the opportunity to be someone else, to make something new, to be creative. And I think it's been absolutely remarkable the way that's been captured within the Independent Care Review. Fiona, you spoke a bit about the design aspects that you're taking on through the Promise. Do you want to say just a bit more about the Promise design and the Pinky Promise design?
Yeah, thank you, David. And just to agree with everything that's been said and the comments that have come through, I think that tonight's conversation has really reinforced the power of creativity and safe spaces and voice and storytelling and finding ways of escaping yourself through stories. So one of the questions that David, you've asked me is how are we going to make sure this time that the care review lands, and what the care reviews, the Promise is doing is building on the care review. So again, some of you know this, the care review's brand, I think, is very beautiful, and it was designed by children and young people. So one of the first things that the care review did way back in the beginning of 2017 was ask children and young people what they wanted it to look like, sound like, feel like, what words they wanted it to use, how to make sure that the review was accessible and that belonged to children and young people in care. And that's why the colours are bright and it's got shapes and nice words and great values. So the Promise is built on all of that and is maintaining that philosophy. And recently we've been asking all of the moving parts of this thing that we call the care system to tell us how they're going to change shape in order to keep the promise that was made to Scotland's children and families on the 5th of February. And so far we've had over 100 responses from different organisations, and that's all of the people that you would hope to see responses from. So it's the hearing system as well as the care inspectorate and all of the things that have to operate differently in order that Scotland can keep the promise this time. And that's great. It is great, it is brilliant, and it's a real reflection of the commitment, but that alone won't be enough. I don't think that we can rely on organisations filled with good intent to always get it right unless they are properly listening to the voice of lived experience, and in the Promise's case, it's care experience. So we are setting up something called the Promise Design School, which will be a school where people can learn about service design, and that's all of the aspects of service design, so that when a local authority or an education establishment or a health board is thinking about how its services have to change shape in order to meet the needs of the care community are in there taking part in the design conversations in a way that actually is valued by the part of the system. And the Pinky Promise Design School is the same, but for littler children. I think the other thing that it's really important to note around what the Promise is doing is there's we've been recruiting recently for an oversight board, which will be a group of people, which is at least 50% care experienced, who will decide whether Scotland is keeping the promise. So there will be a plan, probably early next year the plan will be finalised, and that will be these 100 odd pieces that are joined together into something that is sequenced and coordinated and co-owned and multi-agency, one single plan instead of 100 individual plans. And the plan will be how Scotland is going to do what it said it was going to do. So how it's going to do it, who's going to do it, when they're going to do it, what resources they need, etc. And accompanying the plan, there'll be something called a change programme, which will be all of the tactics about the things that are actually going to happen differently. And there has to be a group of people that decide whether that plan's fit for purpose, whether it's ambitious enough, whether it's hopeful enough, whether it goes far enough, and whether it goes fast enough. And that will be a group called the Oversight Board. The recruitment's happening for it right now. At least 50% of that group will be care experienced. And their job will be to report to the care community on the pace and performance of that plan, and report to Parliament on the pace and performance of that plan. So there'll be 2 reports a year on whether that plan has been delivered. And that's the oversight of all of the moving parts. So in terms of the change programme, making sure that the individual 100 individual pieces are doing what they need to do, that's where the Promise Design School will come into its own, and we will mobilise a really incredibly well-trained care community to be service designers. And one of the things which struck me when I was doing the care review is the First Minister promised that it would be the roots and branches of the care system. That means poverty, that means domestic abuse, that means mental health, that means all sorts of things around substance issues, that means all of the adjacent parts of this system. And if you want to be a service designer in this area, then you will have your own expertise and you will learn skills that allow you to be a service designer, not just in the part that people typically think of as care, but in all of the other parts in and around that. So that's a really exciting thing that is being developed. It will be open to anybody who's care experienced and wants to learn how to do service design. I think probably we're also going to open it up to all of the parts of the system who want to put their staff on. I can see there's a wee bit of enthusiasm from Linda. Thank you, Linda. Who want to put their staff on this course, because I think it's really important that we have folk in a room that understand what the system has to do to meet their needs, and folk in the room who understand how difficult it is to change the system from the inside. So I think we'll also seek to recruit people who want to be part of the change from the inside their organisation. So those are some of the things we're doing. I could go on about other things we're doing, but I'm conscious that this evening's about creative conversations as opposed to about the nuts and bolts of delivery of the promise, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, and I mean, this is remarkable because I listened to a conversation last night between Owen Jones, the Labour activist, and Frankie Boyle. And one of the things that they talked about was the importance of having a movement, the importance of having momentum, not just in the sense of the official momentum movement, but having momentum amongst those people who have a need for change, and making sure that those people who have a need for change also have the capacity to make that change. And what they also talked about was the need for that to be allied for those who could change the system. And that's why we need the political links. And it strikes me that so much of what you're saying is an absolute echo of that power, that we need the grassroots to be moving. And we've seen that so powerfully through Who Cares. And my sense is that if we don't have these conversations and if we don't have the creative engagement around it, we're not going to get the momentum. And if we don't get the momentum, we won't actually get the change. So it's just so timely that you've taken the approach that you have. And thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
I know we don't want to get into the nuts and bolts, but I do think it's important that we face up to the fact that we all have a responsibility for delivering this. We're all the corporate parents. We're all part of the system, whether we like it or not. And for the people that are with us tonight, lots of teachers, lots of people involved in education, what is it that we're looking for from that particular community? Do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would say is I do sometimes feel that the care review is the right construction at the right time. So to your point, there was already a movement of people who had convinced the First Minister that something radical had to happen. And the First Minister, in her speech at that time, gave a sense that there was an opportunity to do something different from traditional reviews. So I'm really conscious that I don't look or sound like the chair of a traditional review. There was a wee bit of resistance to some of the things that the care review did. So appointing governance that was 50% lived experience and 50% professional experience wasn't necessarily palatable. with everybody, and I found myself in very difficult conversations with people that you maybe would have hoped would have known better, quite frankly. Yeah, but now we're at where we're at. It seems that there is an appreciation that this might be a good way to look at things differently. So I was yesterday and the day before, I actually, like everyone else in Scotland, mourning the drugs deaths and looking at Twitter and looking at the call for something that actually listens to the community who are facing those drugs deaths in their own family to figure out what has to happen. And, you know, I'm a big believer that that's the way we need to figure out how to make sure that the support services are in place for people of Scotland. Listen to what people of Scotland need rather than listen to the people who deliver the support services. So to answer your question, so I agree with you. This is for all of us. Scotland made a promise to children and young people. It was trending on Twitter. All political parties agreed. So many parts of the system agreed. Folk who had been involved in the conversation agreed that we had to do this differently. So I think it's all of us, because if all of us don't take responsibility, we're saying it's somebody over there. We're othering the responsibility, and I don't think that that's good enough. In terms of the different parts of the sort of operating environment on the Promises website, which is www.thepromise.scot, there are a number of briefing documents, including one for education, one for health, and those very specifically lift the calls to action within the Promise and try and organise them for those specific sectors. So that we've tried to develop as many tools as we can. The other thing that it's worth saying is on the Care Reviews website, which is www.thecarereview.scot, there's links to all the reports, links to the composite stories, and links to an evidence framework, which is a 500,000 word document of all of the work that the Care Review did. We've banked it as much as we possibly can and put it in one place. So I think that I will be beyond livid if Scotland in a few years' time decides that it needs another review. I think that would be morally reprehensible. Actually, we spent 3 years listening to children and young people telling us their story. We know the answers. It's time to get on with it. So that's sort of my position. And when I say it's time to get on with it, I mean you as much as I mean me. So I've got a job to do. I'll take my responsibility seriously, but I expect everyone else to as well. So I'm looking at some of the comments. Yes, I agree with Paul. The pressure will need to be kept on the Scottish Government by the Oversight Group. I don't think it's just the Scottish Government, though. I think the Scottish Government have a significant role to play in changing, but I don't think it is only them. So it's been widely acknowledged that if, for example, if the care inspectorate came into the room that I'm in right now, they would check it's well lit and well ventilated and there's no trip hazards and that there's a fire extinguisher, but they wouldn't check how I got there. They wouldn't check if I was happy, if I was safe and if I was loved. So they can inspect the setting, but not the journey or the person. So there's an awful lot of moving parts that have to change shape, including the Scottish Government.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in Leanne Bowers, who's got her hand up. Leanne, do you want to put your question or your comment?
So for me, it's very much, so just echoing what Fiona says, in terms of listening, but also engaging with that listening and acting on it, because I think there's quite often we do listen, but taking the children's views or the young people's views forward and acting upon that, because sometimes the listening can be very tokenistic. And I speak as a care experienced adult, but also as a professional working with children and young people. And I feel that as a person myself who's been care experienced a long time ago, I was listened to, but it was very much tokenistic. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, but we can't act on it. The powers who be. So again, coming back down to power again, and unless children and young people are given the opportunity and shown that they are listened to, but that is it's participation as well and not just listening. I've found that right through. I've got younger siblings as well, so who are still in the care system, and very much the participation and really listening, not just, yeah, we hear you, but we can't do anything. And I think for me, that is the most important thing, part of the promise. I've written about it, and I just feel that that's, yeah, you can hear in my voice. That's the, we can listen, but we have to act collaboratively as well, and not just that one person. It's got to be from up above and it going right down to the people who are on the floor line. Thank you.
Leanne's right. Can I just respond to that? Leanne's right. Absolutely right. The words of the promise are, children must be listened to and meaningfully and appropriately involved in decision making about their care, with all those involved properly listening and responding to what children want and need. There must be a compassionate, caring decision making culture focused on children and those that they trust. So Leanne is absolutely right. I'd go further. One of the things that concerned me slightly during the care review is we worked so hard to properly listen and to feed back and to say, this is what you said, this is what's going to happen with it, this is what you said, this is what we're going to do, this is what you said, we're going to try and better understand it, and keep the conversation going so that it's not a transaction. I'm only listening to you right now to figure out this, not actually to get to know you or to have a relationship with you. But the thing that concerned me was we would go to parts of Scotland and work really hard to get to know folk and listen to what it was they wanted to say. And then people within that area, whether it was within the local authority, within the health board, or in schools, or in charities, or would say to us, so what did Leanne say? What is it Leanne's looking for? And it was almost like they'd outsourced their responsibility to listen to Leanne to somebody else. And I think that one of the things the promise has to be really careful about not doing is allowing people to absent their responsibility to listen and to meaningfully involve. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Leanne.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so helpful. I mean, I was involved in the previous review, immediately previous review of care, which is called We Can and Must Do Better, and I've now retitled it We Can and Must Do Sod All, because it really hasn't had the impact that I hoped that it might have had. It was a great report, but it was classically the kind of report that Fiona described, done by the people you would expect to find on it. I have to say, people like myself, people coming in from that kind of background. There were working parties, we were guided by government. This one seems to have broken through that. And there's a brilliant comment in the chat up from Siobhan about one of my young people would say that it is the love that is missing. And what you've talked about today, Fiona, which is so powerful, is that we need to get the cultural change around this. And the language that you've used today is the language of creativity. It's about building bonds of trust. It's about love. It's about care. It's about the emotional engagement and not just the bureaucratic shifting of chairs. And the analogy that you gave around what the Care Commission might do and what it might not do is so apt. We need to get that cultural change moving forward and start talking about what kind of country we want to be emotionally and culturally, and not just in terms of process and legality. I'll stop now.
So, David, can I say one thing in response to what you've just said about past reviews? So I went round chairs of past reviews to ask them why the reviews hadn't stuck, why recommendations hadn't landed. And one of the things that was really obvious is reviews typically look at a really complex system, pick one bit out, take it over here, polish it, take it back and drop it in, and the rest of the system consumes it. I don't live my life in a system. I don't operate by policy silos. I'm a human being who has many different engagements or needs, and I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You know, I don't know if I'm going to have a problem with my health tomorrow, but the system doesn't operate like that. It operates in its silos. They also said there was no money to do what it was they'd said they wanted to do. So the report followed the money, and the money really proved that that's a lot of Horlicks. Just remembered we're being recorded. They also said there was a lack of buy-in from the system, which is why one of the things that the Cure Review did was worked with all of the moving parts of the system, so engaged with all local authorities, engaged with health boards, engaged with schools, made sure that the system was involved in the conversation. They said there was an unwillingness to change and that there was a lot of protectionism. We challenged that. They said there was restrictive rules, which is why we wrote the paper called The Rules, the 44 pieces of legislation, 19 pieces of secondary legislation, 3 international conventions, where childhoods get lost. They said there was an inability, no route map, which is why we're going through the process now of building one plan rather than multiple plans. There was said there was a lack of know-how. So folk said, I'll do that for you, but I don't know how to do that. I would do it, but I don't know how to do it. So there was a lack of skills and confidence. So people can do their bit, but they can't do someone else's bit. Risk was a big problem, that folk consider the risk to themselves and their professional careers of taking a decision rather than a risk to the family of taking that decision. And they said that even if their bit was right, the bits beside them wouldn't allow them to move. And the big thing was culture. And it's interesting hearing people talk today, and what Leanne just said was folk could say I've listened, but actually I've not listened, because culturally I might be nodding my head and I might give you 10 minutes of my time, but actually I'm not listening, I'm not paying attention. So the culture is a really big challenge, and I think it's a challenge that all of us should be tackling and all of us should be challenging.
And I think that's absolutely right. I think it's the holistic nature of this review that gives it far more prospect of success than anything that's happened. It's got coherence. There's a sense of purpose to it. It's rooted in those who require change to be made and giving them the power to make that change, but making sure that those things that they don't have the power to change will be addressed genuinely with them. And those with that responsibility will be held to account. And I think you've done an absolutely brilliant job on that. And I think that contribution that you've just made is one that we need to go back and listen to, because we need to learn from the mistakes that we've made in the past. I think one of the key things that's coming through from all of this is that we all need to think just about how we behave much more generally and how we behave towards each other. Because it's, as you say, it's not a system. Joe Biden has got a brilliant quote, which is, don't tell me what your values are, show me your budget and I'll tell you what your values are. And there's something in that, I think, that we'll look at what we really give a priority to, and that tells us what our values actually are. So thank you enormously for that contribution. Fiona, is there anything you want to add just before we move on to the next part of the conversation?
I don't know whether it's okay just to come in. Is that okay to just contribute?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to say, watching the chat, listening to the conversation, it is indeed really heartening, as everybody's been commenting on, because I think those people who have carved out time to join this conversation tonight are on the same page and are endeavouring to listen as fully as we can. And I just want to say I've been in post for the last 18 months in Fife as a virtual head teacher for Care Experience. And although that's been very challenging in some respects because of lockdown, and it's been kind of a little bit derailed some of what we were doing, and particularly the capacity to actually listen to real young people. I am aware, I have become really aware during that time that the whole corporate parenting, and I hate that label, by the way, but the whole corporate parenting awareness, if you like, within the education setting, I think, needs to be really refreshed. But what I will also say is that I've been very aware of individual teachers in primary and secondary who do really deeply care for young people that they are involved with, and that is encouraging. But I think it's patchy, and I think the culture that we've been talking about, there's a lot of scope for really working on that, for a real consistency across the board in seeing ourselves as, in broadening our concept of what loving means in school, because I think people have this idea of what it means, and they're very conscious as educators of having to keep professional boundaries in place. And I think actually, you know, the core of love is a contract, it's a commitment, it's this, I will meet my promises, and that builds that trust. And children and young people know if you care about them, and if you care about them in a holistic way. So success in learning is a feature in that, but it's not the only feature, and it's underpinned by the quality of your support and the way that you make them feel in school, and what you do to advocate for them in school is all part of that. And I just wanted to add on to that I see there being a real need for what I think it's acknowledged within the promise about addressing stigma, and stigma about, you know, in schools, but educating in a universal way with all your classes and your children, and having a progression program within your health and well-being for broadening our understanding of how varied our experience of family is, and that's all okay as long as we are, you know, within loving family contexts and arrangements. But I have also seen and heard from different age groups of care experienced youngsters how I heard somebody mentioning it tonight on the chat line, that they don't know themselves very well often. They're not always clear about their interests and their passions, and it is because of that very early experience, and perhaps for no fault of anybody, but they haven't maybe had the encouragement when they were very young to explore what they are good at, because they've perhaps not always had consistent caregivers around them who are focusing on their needs as they grow and develop. And I think that this lack of emotional insight and literacy, and that inability to kind of tune into their own emotions, which help us identify our passions, and maybe their predominance in their experience of some of the really challenging, difficult emotions that kind of overwhelm a little bit, have made it harder for them to be carefree and to go with what feels good. And I think there needs to be emotional education beyond emotion works. I think it needs to be at a much more granulated level, and it needs to be universal so that they don't feel stigmatized, but that, you know, that there's real scaffolding for them in a progression pathway. And that's the end of what I wanted to just share.
I mean, I think that's just so useful in terms of tying things together, Kate. One of the things that you got at is an echo of one of the comments that Fiona made really early in the discussion, that what Scotland doesn't have is gaps, what it has is cracks, and that idea that what we need to do is seal the cracks so that there's a consistency in young people's experience. And I think you've identified that incredibly well. I think one of the other things that you did really powerfully in that contribution was to emphasise that we need to think much more widely about how we deal with people, all people, not just those people who are in care or care experienced, that we need to think about how we take children. There's been lots of helpful comments on the chat about the importance of early intervention, about starting early, but your points about actually knowing our children, not labelling them, not making their circumstances their destiny, but knowing them and understanding them and taking children forward from where they are. Relationships coming through from Astrid in the chat line. I think you've done that incredibly well. So you've given us that sense of coherence and consistency, which is important. The other thing that you've done is you've highlighted some of the steps that have been taken. Your role as a virtual head teacher, I think, is a sign that the system is prepared to invest. Not enough, not consistently enough yet, but the system is prepared to invest, and the appointments of virtual head teachers, I think, is a very useful step forward, as is the appointment of Sharon McGee. who's got a specific role, and I'm going to bring Sharon in to talk a bit about her role, to introduce herself and to take us into another film, which Sharon's going to bring into the conversation. So Sharon, can I bring you in now, both on audio and video, please?
Wonderful, thanks so much, David. As David said, my name is Sharon McGee. I'm a Quality Improvement Education Officer, seconded as a primary head teacher until June, and my specific remit is for care experienced children and young people. And you know, I am feeling just incredibly inspired, as I think a lot of us are in this room, and I've just really enjoyed being here with you. My comments are going to be brief, but what I've enjoyed this evening is about learning and really kind of harnessing the energy that's happening at a national level, and also those very raw and powerful personal stories we heard from some of our young people, particularly in Edinburgh. And what we have heard, and what has been the overwhelming message for me tonight, is that creativity can transform lives. And sometimes I think when we're putting in interventions to support children and young people's attendance or attainment in schools, some of those interventions are maybe about health and well-being, some of them are about sport. And for me, really what this has made me think about is how can we harness creativity, and how can we bring the arts as a safe space in children and young people's lives. And so what we're going to show you now is a story. It's 3 women's stories from Edinburgh. It was commissioned by the City of Edinburgh Council about a year ago. And all those women all have creative safe spaces. But the overwhelming or the underpinning message of this video is about the power that we have in this room. And while we can't underestimate the impact of being in care, neither should we ever forget or underestimate the impact that each and every single one of us here has to be part of that child or young person's repair. And so I'm going to show you this video now.
You know, I was always the kid that was, you know, Carmel's got a bit of an attitude problem. Like, Carmel's always distracting the class. She's a bit of a class clown. Like, she could go on to do things, but she won't put in the effort. She's a bit too lazy.
When I was in high school, I was at a point where my life was kind of falling apart, and I was having like different placement moves, and I didn't really have any stability apart from high school.
School offered me a sense of stability. It offered me a place of security. It offered me a place of routine, and it offered me a place where actually I could flourish, a place where I could develop my talents, a place where I could really define myself as a person, and a place where I could go where I did feel that actually people believed in me and people were really wanting me to do my very, very best.
There was a point in school where they could have kicked me out, definitely. It would have been completely within their rights to, and they didn't.
When I pushed beyond that barrier and kept going when I wanted to stop, it all became positive. And it was my first kind of realization that if you do put effort in, something can come back.
Straight from birth, I was in care, and I was in kinship care, which meant that I was placed with my granny. And I loved my granny very much, and there was lots of wonderful things about my relationship with her. But as I grew up, I realised that actually my family situation was very different. I started to recognise that other children didn't have visits from social workers. Other children didn't have to go for medicals. Other children didn't have supervised contact with their mum. And so gradually, as I got older and older, I did start to realise that I was very different. When I was in school, I really, really enjoyed music lessons. And when I was in first year, I learned how to play the flute. However, in order to continue, I needed my own instrument, and that wasn't something that was going to happen. But a music teacher recognised my talent, and she recognised in order for me to continue and progress, I needed my own instrument. And unbeknown to me, she had contacted my social worker, who turned up at school one day, took me in his car, took me to the local music shop and bought me a flute. And that flute I still use today. There are times when I'm taking my flute out that I'm reminded of the kindness of that social worker and the kindness of that music teacher and the impact that they had on my life. And when I'm playing in my orchestra, I'm reminded that the reason that I'm there and the reason I'm playing my flute is because 2 people saw a talent in me and because 2 people were willing to invest in me, and that's incredibly important.
From the age of 3, I was placed in kinship care with my maternal grandmother. I didn't have any other friends at school who were care experienced or who lived outside of their parents' care. So yeah, there definitely was that sense of difference growing up, because nobody really talked about it when I was at school, you kind of just went on with feeling that way. I was always very active. I was always very good at sport. I always really enjoyed sport. But at the same time, I was always kind of too cool for doing well. You know, I didn't ever really want to get to a stage in life where things were too perfect or too good, because I knew how quickly those things could just completely and utterly disappear. One of my key influences at school was my hockey coach, who was one of the PE teachers. And she was the first person in my life that, when I tried to quit hockey, she didn't let me. It wasn't even in so much what she said, it was how many times she approached me with it. I mean, it was constant. That feeling of someone really wanting you to be there when you kind of just thought you were a bit of a nuisance was really, really nice. Nobody had ever said, well, no, I don't think you should quit before. And she was the first person that did. And that, for me, has had a massive impact, you know, not just on the remainder of the time I had in school, but on the rest of my kind of journey in life. My first big dream in life was to be a professional wrestler. I wanted to be a pro wrestler from the age of 6. As a girl, starting out in that business and achieving that dream is incredibly difficult. Having that hockey coach as part of my life, who challenged me in the past when I wanted to quit and who motivated me to persevere at things, gave me the strength to continue to pursue that dream, you know, throughout my life and deal with all the setbacks, physical and mental, that come along with pursuing a dream like that. What has been an absolutely tiny little thing, probably in her memory, has had a huge impact on me going on to do something that has defined my life so far, really.
When I was in high school, I was at a point where my life was kind of falling apart, and I was having like different placement moves, and I didn't really have any stability apart from high school. A lot of the problems came from my home life, where there was a lot of like neglect and abuse, and I think that probably impacted my development. Moving into high school is like really hard for any teenager, but when you've got all this other stuff going on, it was really, really difficult, and I kind of started acting out, and I ended up like having to leave the school and going to a couple of different schools. They took a lot of stick from me at the start, and had they not been so willing to sort of understand and so supportive, I probably wouldn't be where I am without them. I got into music because I ended up going along to this music group, and they had a section there that was just all about lyric writing. And the tutor there just taught me how to use it as like a cathartic outlet. It really helped me work through some of the issues that I had, helped me figure out what it was like. Getting it down on paper just almost changed everything. I think without music, I probably would have been in a very different situation right now. It gave me something to do. It was like another path to take rather than going down the one that a lot of people said that I was going to end up going down. Now, like, you know, I'm sitting in a music studio where I work, where I've got like a regular job, and I don't know if I'd have made it to this point without the support of my school.
So for me, one of the things that staff can do is to ensure that they listen to young people and that they take their concerns and their views seriously, and ensure that that child or young person knows that their views have been acted upon. Because what that will mean is that children and young people will share whatever is worrying them. And for me, growing up, there were lots of times where I did share information with people and it wasn't acted upon and it wasn't taken seriously. And then it meant when those concerns became more significant or more serious, I didn't share.
You know, kids go into care through absolutely no fault of their own. It's not a choice that you make to grow up without your parents or away from your parents or require support from the authorities to live at home with your parents. You don't ask for any of that. And our role as corporate parents is to take accountability for some of that.
So for teachers to really invest so much time and thought into the advice that they give me to try and help me be better and try and help me have a better life, then it really made a difference.
But taking that little moment, sharing that extra smile, giving that little thumbs up, or just saying to that child, how are you today? Or just letting them know that you're there for them is one of the most important things that I think we can do.
If we don't cement the relationships and focus on a child's well-being, we're not going to achieve any of the academic stuff. And that's not just for kids that have experienced care, that's for any kid that's in school.
And thank you so much for that. Leanne, do you want to come in?
Hi, yeah, sorry, my chat's not working, and so that's why I've sort of come in again. But it was just to go back to what I think it was Kate was saying about the corporate parenting and how yeah, I found that I work in early years, but we done a joint project with the looked after head teacher of East Lothian, and it was fantastic because we got lots of young people in from local cluster high schools, and they were doing lots of work with our children, and there was that missing link where staff, I think for me the project, what it really highlighted was that stigma and that stereotype that comes alongside care experienced children and young people, and that, oh, that's just them. And yeah, so it's having that love and hope and building the relationship. But then just going on to Sharon's video just now, I think summarises everything. I think it says it all. It's about that significant school creates that environment that gives you that security, the routine, the trust. But when you're moving schools a lot, you lose that a lot. And I found that for myself, I was in 7 different schools. So in terms of the creativity, it didn't follow me through the different schools that I went to, so that was lost. And in primary school, I loved getting on that stage. I loved being the focus of attention and being somebody who could just be me and be happy. And as you move through schools, you sort of lose that, because especially if you're moving around the city and it's completely different sort of areas. And so for me, I think Sharon's video at the end summarised a lot of what I was going to say when I did put my hand up, which is just that one person, it just takes one person to believe. And I still remember that primary school teacher who gave me that opportunity. I'm 37 now, so it was a long time ago. But if I didn't have that relationship with her, I don't think I'd be the person who I was today. So, and it just comes back to that corporate and parenting again, that how would we want our children to be treated? And it's just being mindful of that when we're in our position and working with children and young people. Would we want this for our own children? Would we want this for our own family? Would we want them to be labelled, stereotyped, put into that box of, oh, they're never going to achieve? And I think as I got through high school, that was very much my part. Oh, it's just another young person who is not engaging with school, and nobody believed. And for some reason, I managed to do it myself, whatever reason. But I think that's the missing link as well. So it's, yeah, if we're all here today, and it's lovely to see that. And for me, the one thing to take away is just Sharon's video, just that we all have an important role to play, and that smile, that welcoming, how are you today, how was last night? Because as a care experienced person, you're moved constantly, and nobody asks how are you, and nobody sort of links that to your own experiences. So hopefully with the promise, the independent care review, and all of us coming together, as I would say the last couple of years is happening, it seems to be more out there, but it's just to hold on to that and keep going. But it's, yeah, Sharon's video just summarised it, so it's probably cut off what I was going to say, David.
Yeah, no, thanks, Leanne. I'm grateful for that. And Sharon, I'm going to cut you off as well, because I'm just so conscious of time at the moment. And I hope that people will pick up on the links with Sharon. She's got a big job to do, but she's got the energy and the commitment to make sure that job gets done. Tonight, for me, has been as moving and emotional as I expected it to be. What I didn't expect to get from tonight was the incredible wave of hope. That video, Sharon, just amazing, because the big thing it said was, we do make a difference. And what Leanne's done is said, sometimes we make a difference in the smallest and simplest ways. It sounds sentimental, but with a smile, with a word, with that listening, that genuine listening. And please, I think if we all go away from this conversation with that commitment to do that, and that commitment also to stick with the promise to continue to engage with the work that Fiona and others are doing, to make sure that we do get that link, we do take up the invitations that Fiona is putting out just now to keep that contact, because we can and we must do better. And this, I think, now is the time to do it. Thanks to everyone who's been involved. Thanks particularly to Fiona, to Sean, to Laura, to Sharon, to everyone who's contributed to this. Thanks again to Creative Scotland for the funding that we get for these conversations. We've got 3 coming up in the new term. We're going to start off looking at Dream Believers. We're looking at things that we can actually do to make a difference in schools through creativity. We're then going to go on and look at assessment and certification, and we're then going to round off by looking at play and trying to bring together all the ideas that we're doing, because it's how we are that will make the difference, as much as what we do will make the difference. And there's no better time to be talking about that than coming up to Christmas, coming up to a time of genuine hope. And let's make sure that we take up the challenge and fulfill the promise. Thanks to everyone who's been with us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you.